There are looks that speak louder than words. At the gym, they often came dressed as glances, quick, clipped, and just long enough to bruise. Ronan had learned to ignore most of them. He was used to the sideways stares when he corrected another man's form, the way some clients called him bro with too much edge, or how others avoided eye contact altogether once they saw the small rainbow pin on his duffel bag. But nothing cut quite like the gaze from the man on treadmill number 4. He never missed a morning. Always at 6:03, never 6:00, always a white towel slung neatly over one shoulder, never around the neck. Always in navy track pants, phone armband, and that clipped, half-smirk expression like he'd just heard a joke only he found funny. He never gave his name, only signed in as W. Grayson. But the way he looked at Ronan, it lingered like a cold draft in a warm room. Not outright hatred, but something sharper. Condescension dressed as civility. The kind that doesn't scream, it judges. Ronan was no stranger to silent judgment. He'd been navigating it his entire life, from locker rooms where his presence went unspoken to family dinners, where his future was discussed as if it didn't include the truth about who he was. But at this gym, he'd carved something out for himself, a space where he could stand tall, where strength was earned, not assigned. So when W. Grayson muttered comments like, "Yoga's a bit soft for a man, isn't it?" Or, "I guess the kids like you for other reasons," Ronan didn't flinch. He simply returned to his work, not because it didn't sting, but because responding meant surrendering ground he had already bled for. Still, there was one morning that broke the pattern. It started like any other. Ronan was guiding a teenage boy through stretches. The kid was nervous, all hunched shoulders and anxious glances. It was clear he wasn't just here to get fit. He was looking for somewhere to belong. Ronan saw pieces of his younger self in that boy, the hesitation, the hunger for quiet encouragement. But W. Grayson had other ideas. He passed them on his way out, slowed just enough to let his voice carry. Kids like that shouldn't be coddled. Weakness isn't something to celebrate. It wasn't even directed at Ronan, not technically, but the boy's face crumpled. He stood up and said he'd be back next week. He never returned. That was the last time Ronan saw the man on treadmill number 4. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The towel hook remained empty at 6:03. No navy track pants, no sideways glances, no cutting remarks disguised as casual musings. And slowly, Ronan let go, or at least tried to, until one afternoon, just after closing, the gym phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a legal representative. She asked if she could meet Ronan in person. Said it was about the late Walter Grayson. Ronan paused. That name was new, but the voice behind it wasn't. He agreed to meet, if only to satisfy a strange curiosity that had quietly taken root. What he didn't know then was that Walter had never really left, and what followed would unravel every assumption Ronan had made about the man behind that smug expression. If this story touches something inside you, if you've ever felt unseen in a place where you show up every day, fighting to belong, don't forget to follow our journey here on Heart Stories. Because sometimes the people who hurt us leave behind more than just scars. They leave behind unfinished stories. And maybe, a chance to write the ending ourselves. The lawyer's office wasn't what Ronan expected. It wasn't sleek or sterile like the corporate law firms he'd seen in movies. It smelled faintly of leather and old paper. A small fern in the corner looked like it had been dying slowly for years. And behind a modest oak desk sat a woman with silver-streaked hair, a voice like still water, and eyes that had clearly witnessed their share of complicated goodbyes. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Ronan Ellis?" she began. "I'm here on behalf of the estate of Walter Grayson. You were named in his final testament." Ronan blinked. "Why, he left something to you," she said gently. "But before I can explain, I need to show you something." She slid a slim folder across the desk. Inside were several grainy screenshots, security footage stills. Ronan stared at them, confused at first, until recognition dawned. The gym, his gym. And there he was, in frame after frame, stretching with clients, correcting posture, laughing with an older woman who'd once said he reminded her of her son. In one shot, he was crouched beside a young man, holding his shoulder with both hands, whispering something with a seriousness he barely remembered. Ronan looked up. These were taken from Walter Grayson's private feed, the woman said. He had remote access to every location in the Grayson Athletics chain. Most people didn't know he still monitored them, but he did, especially yours. Ronan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He was watching me. She nodded. For almost a year. There was a pause that felt heavier than silence. Why me, he finally asked. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it wasn't exactly kind. She opened a small box beside her and placed a flash drive on the desk. He left you this too, his words, his voice. But I'll summarize the rest if you'd rather hear it from me first. Ronan hesitated, then nodded. Walter was a complex man. He grew up in a family that punished softness in any form. His older brother, Henry, was gay, came out in the 80s, was disowned, died in his 30s. Walter never forgave himself for the silence, for not speaking up, for watching his brother vanish and pretending it hadn't broken him. She leaned back, eyes softening, and then he met you. Ronan felt his chest tighten. At first, he didn't know how to separate the past from the present. You reminded him of Henry, not just because you're gay, but because of how you carry yourself, the way you make space for others, the way you stayed kind in rooms where kindness was often mocked. So he watched, and he listened, and in the end, he made a decision. She reached for another envelope, thicker, heavier, sealed. This is the formal part. The will. Walter Grayson named you as his successor, the sole inheritor of Grayson Athletics, all assets, all holdings, and full operational authority. Ronan stared at her. What? It's yours, she repeated. He didn't want a board. He didn't trust the corporate structure anymore. He trusted you. On one condition. The air felt thinner now. You must keep the name, and you must open the 3 new branches in the next 5 years. Each one must offer free community programs for LGBTQ+ youth and trauma-informed physical training. That was his final request. Not just to pass on ownership, but to correct the silence he once let destroy someone he loved. Ronan sat back, too stunned to speak. The man who had mocked him, who had made him feel smaller than the space he stood in, that man had been watching not to judge but to understand, to atone, to hand him not a burden, but a second chance. A legacy rewritten in calloused hands and quiet regret. It wasn't just a company, it was an apology he never got to say, and now it was Ronan's to carry. The letter sat on his kitchen counter for 2 full days, sealed, untouched, like a wound waiting to be opened. Ronan went to the gym, led his classes, greeted the regulars, wiped down weights, smiled when expected. But inside, he was fractured. A piece of him had shifted the moment he walked out of that law office. And now the world felt strangely misaligned like. The air had thinned just enough to make everything a little harder to breathe. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the inheritance itself, or the fact that it came from a man who once made him feel invisible. What did it mean to carry someone else's regret? What did it mean to build something from the bones of an apology? That night, long after the lights were out and only the hum of the fridge filled the room, Ronan finally opened the letter. Walter's handwriting was sharp, upright, like it had never learned how to bend. The message was short. You reminded me of what my brother could have been. If I hadn't stood on the wrong side of his pain, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I believe in your strength. Use this company to protect the boys the world still tries to break. Do what I couldn't. Speak louder than silence. It wasn't flowery. It wasn't poetic. It was real, and it was enough. Ronan signed the documents the next morning, But legacy is never passed down without consequence. The first board meeting was quiet in the way thunder feels before it breaks. The executives, many of whom had been with the Grayson Athletics for over a decade, sat stiffly in their chairs, adjusting ties and glancing at each other like they were waiting for someone else to speak first. They had read the documents. They had seen the clause. None of them could override it. But that didn't mean they would welcome him. "Congratulations," one finally said, with a tone reserved for a distant relative who'd won the lottery. "It's certainly unconventional," Ronan offered a firm nod. "Walter trusted me to lead this company forward. That's what I intend to do." Another cleared his throat. "Respectfully, Mr. Ellis, you're not from this world. You're a trainer, a very good one, no doubt. But we're talking about an operation with 36 branches, hundreds of employees, legal structures, unions, taxes." "I'm aware," Ronan interrupted it calmly, "and I'm not here to pretend I know everything. That's why I'm keeping the existing operational team. I'm here for the vision and for the people." The room shifted. No one objected outright. They didn't need to. He saw it in their eyes, the polite dismissal, the rehearsed tolerance. The same kind of silence that had haunted Walter's brother, the same silence Ronan had lived through too many times. But he didn't flinch. He spent the next 2 months visiting every branch. He met with janitors, front desk staff, night shift cleaners, group instructors. He asked about what needed fixing, what never worked, what could be better. He kept his promises. And when he launched the first open hour of free, judgment-free training block for queer youth, survivors of bullying, and those struggling with body image, he didn't announce it with fanfare. He just showed up, held the door open, stood by the mat. Only 5 kids came that first week, but the following Sunday, there were 12, then 21, then a waiting list. And still, the board didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their disapproval filled the space in other ways. Canceled meeting invites, budget approvals delayed, memos rewritten behind his back. The passive resistance of people too proud to fight you openly, but too threatened to let you lead freely. Ronan knew that kind of war. He'd fought it before, not with fists, but with presence, with consistency, with refusing to disappear. He was no longer just a trainer. He was the face of a company some wished would go back to how it used to be. But going back was never an option, not for him, and not for the legacy Walter had left behind. The headline hit him like a punch. "Gay personal trainer inherits fitness empire after CEO's sudden death, PR move or coincidence." It was plastered across a low-tier business gossip blog at first, but the story picked up traction within hours. Soon, it spread like dry brush catching flame. Photos of Ronan were pulled from his public fitness machine, smiling with clients, high-fiving kids during weekend boot camps, coaching seniors in chair yoga. They were cropped, taken out of context, and paired with words like unqualified, diversity optics, and activist agenda. Ronan sat at his desk in the now familiar corner office, the one he never quite felt belonged to him, staring at the screen as the story multiplied. He wasn't surprised, just tired. He could have ignored it. That's what his communications lead suggested. Don't engage, it'll die down. We've weathered worse. But this wasn't just about him. It was about every teenager who walked into his Sunday classes unsure whether they belonged. Every staff member who quietly came out after he took over. Every kid who wore a binder under their hoodie and finally found a place they could breathe. If he stayed silent, what message did that send? He declined all press inquiries, except one. A local podcast run by a former athlete who'd once trained at Grayson Athletics. Not mainstream, not viral, but honest. He agreed to record it live. No scripts, no questions in advance. Just truth. The studio was small and warm, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and determination. The host, a woman in her 30s named Leah, shook his hand with quiet intensity. "Thank you for saying yes," she said. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The red light blinked on. Leah didn't waste time. You're getting a lot of attention. Some good, some not. What do you want people to know? That the headlines are missing. Ronan took a breath. I didn't ask for any of this, he said. Not the company, not the attention, and certainly not the assumptions. I was just doing my job, helping people feel strong in their own skin. He paused, fingers laced together in his lap. The man who left me this company, he and I didn't start off well. He made me feel small, once, and I carried that with me. But what I didn't know then was that he was carrying something too: guilt, grief, a brother lost to silence. I became a reminder of who he failed to stand up for. And maybe in his own flawed way, he tried to make peace with that, not by saying sorry, but by giving me the tools to make sure someone else never has to feel that kind of erasure. There was a long pause. Leah didn't interrupt. I know I'm not what people expected. I know what it looks like from the outside. But I also know what it feels like to walk into a room and wonder if you're safe, if you'll be seen, if you matter. That's why I stayed. That's why I didn't sell. And that's why I'll keep showing up. The red light blinked off. Leah nodded once, her eyes glassy. Ronan, that was more than I hoped for. The episode dropped the next day, quietly, without clickbait, without scandal, and yet it rippled. Not through tabloids or flashy headlines, but through inboxes, text messages, and whispered links between people who had once felt like shadows. A week later, a woman in her 60s showed up to the downtown gym. She waited until Ronan had finished class, then approached him with trembling hands. I used to know Walter's brother, she said softly. I watched them grow up. Henry was the kindest boy I'd ever met. He loved poetry, never hurt anyone. She paused. When he disappeared, we all stopped talking about it. I think we were told to, but I never forgot his name. She handed Ronan a faded photograph. 2 boys, a park bench, laughter frozen in time. Ronan took it with both hands, unsure what to say. He would have been proud of you, she said, and maybe of Walter too. They gathered in the early morning, just as the city yawned into daylight. Ronan stood at the front entrance of the newest Grayson Athletics branch, an old brick building once slated for demolition, now transformed into a space of light, color, and quiet defiance. It was the 3rd branch he'd opened since inheriting the company, the final piece of the promise. But today wasn't just about expansion. Today was about memory. A thin frame now hung beside the door, just above eye level. Inside it, 2 photos, one of Walter, stern in his later years, and one of Henry, smiling in a soft sweater with grass-stained knees. Between them, a plaque etched in metal read, "Strength is not how loudly you speak, but who you choose to stand up for when the world goes quiet." It had taken Ronan weeks to find a photo of Henry. The woman from the podcast visit had helped connect him with a former neighbor who'd mailed a weathered envelope from out of state. When Ronan saw Henry's face, something in him shifted. It was like meeting someone he already knew. The plaque was more than tribute. It was declaration. This space, like all the others, would be open to anyone who had been told they didn't belong. As people filed into the gym, Ronan watched from the side. Some were familiar faces from his old Sunday classes. Some were strangers. A few looked nervous, clutching their gym bags like shields. He recognized the look. He once wore it too. Halfway through the welcome session, a voice cut through the low murmur of the room. Is this where I'm supposed to stand if I've never used a gym before? The crowd turned. A boy, maybe 14, stood awkwardly near the back, tall for his age, with curls that refused to sit still and a voice still unsure of its volume. Next to him stood a man, tired eyes, clean shave, suit jacket slightly wrinkled. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Ronan's breath caught. The man stepped forward. I hope this isn't too much, he said quietly. I'm Henry's nephew. Walter was my uncle. We Didn't know about the will until recently. He paused, then gestured to the boy. This is my son. He came out last fall. It hasn't been easy for him, for us, but then we heard the podcast, and he asked me no. He begged me to bring him here, said he wanted to see the place where someone like him was seen. Ronan felt his chest rise slowly. You found the right place, he said. The boy smiled. It was small, unsure, but real. Ronan led them inside. The session that day wasn't about reps or calories. It was about movement, about breath, about claiming space in a room you once thought would never hold you. After class, the boy stayed behind. My name's Tyler, he said, holding out his hand. I want to come back, every week, if that's okay. It's more than okay, Ronan replied, shaking his hand firmly. It's exactly why we're here. As the gym emptied out, sunlight poured through the front windows. The plaque shimmered faintly, and Ronan stood alone for a moment, just long enough to feel the quiet wash over him. Not the kind of silence that wounds, but the kind that heals. The kind his own story had fought to create. Because in the end, Walter had not left him a company. He had left him a door, and Ronan had opened it for every person still waiting outside. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated only to become the very person someone else needed? Share your story below. You never know who you might inspire. If this journey spoke to something inside you, don't forget to follow us here on Heart Stories. Every story we share is a reminder you matter, you belong, and your voice is stronger than you think.